Hi, guys, thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Three Pillars podcast with your host, Chriselda Barretto. Today, we'll be speaking on the second pillar of writing. Hello, Eric.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
So, how are you doing, Eric?
How is everybody doing, right?
Yeah.
A little crazy here. Now you're in Belgium, right?
Yeah, I am. Have
Oh
you
my
been here?
gosh. No, I haven't. But
Okay.
yeah, it's a little crazy here. And
hmm
yeah, with this whole virus thing and
Do you have
one
a bit of a cold?
well, no, I'm feeling pretty good. But
Mm.
my son, I'm out on the West Coast here and he's back on the East Coast. He actually goes to Harvard and he we got a text from him like 3 days ago saying, "Oh my gosh, I have to completely move out and come home." And so we've been remotely getting him all set, and he comes home tonight. But he has a compromised immune system, and so
Oh.
between that and all my kids everywhere, and it's just been crazy.
Mm.
So
No,
how are
yeah,
you?
this. Oh, I'm fine. Well, it's Friday evening. I had a pretty heavy work schedule this week, so I'm actually looking forward to the weekend. But it's true, this virus thing is on everybody's mind for the moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite scary. And the worst thing is, I mean, they're taking a lot of precautions and everything. And just yesterday, I went to the supermarket because I just wanted to stock up on just general stuff that you need, milk and water and stuff. Oh my God, it was a state of shock there. There were lines and lines of people queuing up just to get a cart, to get into the supermarket. There was no place to park. The racks were empty. There were lines of people queuing up at the cashiers. I mean, it was horrible. I mean, so I think the panic is kind of setting in, and everybody's going a bit, a bit crazy. So,
That's so interesting to hear because, it reminds me that, we're all so connected because same thing's happening here, and
mm,
it's interesting. It takes a thing like this to connect everybody, connect just not the United States and this whole crazy political process and everything and connect us, but it connects us with the world because we all have this basic same instincts and
mm.
needs. But we forget that so easily.
Yeah, but it's awful to have this this virus affect all of us to such a, I don't know, to such an impact. I mean, I didn't expect it to be that bad. I mean, because we've always had time and again we've had these scares, SARS and this and that, and now it's pretty extreme. I mean, even our work schedule has kind of changed. So generally I do like the 9 to 5 stuff and things, but now they don't want us to. They've kind of separated us into two teams, and so we're actually working in shifts, so we don't actually come in contact with half of the team. So, like for example, in a 5-day week schedule, what they're planning to do is, and we're going to start this from Monday, so I'm not even sure how that's going to work out. But for next week, for example, I'm supposed to go in just 3 days of the 5 days, and the other 2 days I'm supposed to work from home. And the
Oh
2 days
wow.
that I'm working at home, the rest of the team, so the other half will actually go into the office. And we're not supposed to mingle with each other, so the two teams are not supposed to mingle with each other so that there's, you prevent the contamination or cross contamination or whatever. But this is crazy. I mean, I can't imagine. And it's a kind of a test for the next 2 weeks, but it means that I won't be seeing some of my colleagues for the next 2 weeks. And it's kind of like crazy. I mean, I don't even know how to deal with it actually.
I was talking to my daughter, and she's 19 and she's staying
Mm.
in Boston because she has a job back there, even though her school closed. And I was telling her it's unprecedented. We don't have like an end game. We don't know exactly the outcome, and it really puts you into a place where you have to depend on your higher power or whatever you want to call it. To that there's, I mean, it's unprecedented. So it just
Mm.
puts us in this strange state of something very uncompleted, and but with me, it's interesting because I've been in recovery now for 29 years, and through the grace of God in AA, and I go to meetings all the time, AA meetings all the time, and now that we're recommended not to go to our meetings. And it's like I sponsor some guys, and they're like, "Well, are you going to the meeting?" And I'm like, "I don't know." because it's
Mm.
recommended that we don't go. So it's a crucial part of my recovery. But I've talked to a lot of guys, and so we stay in contact through phone and have small meetings. But yeah, it's really kind of upset the whole thing. So
Mm.
it's a trying time for all of us.
Yeah, I think it makes you kind of realize that, something that we took for granted, like our freedom and the stuff that you do daily, that it's kind of put on the line now, and it kind of makes you see things from another perspective. Or even going to the gym, because I have some friends that that will meet up at a certain point in the day, and they would go to a gym to actually exercise together, and that's not allowed anymore. So the gym classes have been cancelled. You can't go to the gym. The gyms have been shut down here. The discotheques, the clubs, the restaurants. I mean, it's crazy. All these things have shut down. So I don't know what the impact is going to be in the long run. Hopefully, it doesn't go on for a long time, but for the moment, things look pretty dire,
Yeah,
scary.
I agree. And but if there's a tiny bit of solace that I get out of it, just listening to you and knowing in Belgium it's the same as it is here, and
Mm,
that we all react the same way, to me that it just that's kind of a powerful thing for me to realize that we're all in this together, no matter where we're at, and
yeah.
that's pretty powerful.
Mm. Yeah, scary, scary times. But at least
Yeah,
we have this, so we can
right,
actually connect with each other and speak to each other and talk about it. That's already something. Imagine if you didn't have that. I don't
right.
know.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, but this connection is amazing. I mean, I've done lots of podcasts, and this one is one of the clearer connections. Considering that you're in Belgium, I've done New Zealand and England, but we've done Zoom, and it sounds like literally there's no lag, and it sounds like you're right here. So this is pretty nice.
It's nice, eh? You said
Yeah,
New Zealand. Have you spoken to a podcast in New Zealand?
yeah. Actually, I've how to strange. I've done two in New Zealand, so I guess I'm popular in New Zealand.
Oh, how come? What happened? What
That's
happened?
it's what happened is that the idea of trauma and recovery, and it's all universal, and speaking with you and this whole, we're all going through a minor or major piece of trauma with this reaction to this virus. I mean, no matter how you look at it, it is traumatizing,
Mm,
and that's part of my work, is that there isn't really a scale to trauma. To the individual, trauma is a very individualized thing, so it's very subjective, and so to really try to rate people's or quantify people's trauma, it's not it's meaningless, because to the individual, that's what the trauma is. And trauma, then it's just we're all being semi traumatized by this virus, and it brings us together in this one, on this level of connecting through this fear of what could happen, what's happening, and going through this. And so, if there's a plus side to anything, at least it's bringing us all together.
mm. Yeah, that's so true. Well, before we go any further, let me welcome you to the show. So, welcome to the Three Pillars, and I'm so glad to have you on today. Um, and just before we go any further, Eric, could you tell our listeners a little bit about who you are?
I'm Eric Christiansen, and I'm a documentary filmmaker. Although I'd rather go by the title of messenger or healer with my films. And I've been doing this for over 30 years. And all my work is based on the ideas of the truth. What happened to the individual, the trauma, the healing, the point of identification when you find other people like you and start a healing path, and then the hope, which is basically when you've got to a certain point in healing, you go back to the front of the line and help others. And that's what I try to portray in my films, and I've been doing that for 30 years. And I'm in recovery myself from drugs and alcohol, and I've had my own trauma in my life. The Painted Cave fire that happened, fire disaster that happened over 30 years ago, that really set me on this path, and that's kind of who I am, and a father and a husband and and an individual that's all together with everybody else on this planet.
Mm. That's amazing. Now I know you've had a pretty tough life. Through all you've been through and your experiences, what led you to filmmaking? Why did you think that filmmaking would help you portray your story or what you wanted to portray to others? Why did you use that as your medium of expression?
That's a really good question, and you know, I began making films around second grade, so I was around 7 years old when I really did my first film with the script, and it's just something that I was attracted to and called to, and I remember, being super young, making these films, and something inside of me constantly would say to me, even as a child, with my little Super 8 film camera, that I had some message to give to people, and I didn't really know what it was then, but I made dozens and dozens of films. I made quite a few films each year, up until now. And it's just been my calling, and there's never been anything else I really wanted to do other than to make films and portray people and their different paths.
And I think most of your films have a kind of a, how do you say this? The storyline is very educational, or you're trying to give a message out of healing. How do you manage to do that without getting too emotional, or how do you manage to get an outside view of what you're trying, the story you're trying to tell? How do you do that?
That's quite a process because I do get very drawn into my subject matter. You
Mm,
know, I have a gift of empathy,
mm-hmm,
and it's my ability to connect with people on a very emotional level. And that's really what makes my films come alive are these interviews and being able to really be transparent and connect with the individuals in the film. So that alone brings on two things: is it brings on a lot personally to shoulder these things, but it also brings on a lot of responsibility because I'm being given a very sacred story. So how do I not get emotionally involved? I think that's part of my job. I think I get very emotionally involved in my films and in the participants. But over time, I've learned how to compartmentalize that. I've learned how to accept these stories that I'm telling from the veterans, from the 9/11 survivors. I accept these stories as a gift from them and a gift of trust. And I take that responsibility, but I accept that and I put it in a beautiful little box and I store that so it doesn't become part of my outside life. So I can kind of compartmentalize the emotion and the experience that I work with in my films separate than my personal life. And that's taken literally my whole career to learn how to really get some sort of balance there. And it was only towards the end of my last film, Searching for a Home, Coming Back from War, I got a handle on being able to deal with those emotions and separate them from myself and really focus them then when I need to in the film. And then, as I say, put them away as a sacred gift when I'm not working on the film.
mm. And it's human actually to have things going wrong, and stuff that happens that you don't expect, unexpected things. Have you ever had, tell us some stories where things haven't actually gone the way you wanted to, and how you kind of worked through it?
Oh my gosh. You know, that again, that's a great question about how when things go differently than I plan. And that's become a working part of how my modality in making films. It's just part of how I work now is allowing things to go in a different direction. Because each time I come into an interview, um, for example, with um, military sexual trauma survivor, Sandra Lee, I'd come into the interview and I have some ideas about where I think the story should go. I know enough about her, I kind of have some set ideas. But then we sit down and we start discussing and having our interview, she starts opening up. We start connecting on a very deep kind of empathic level, and she will go into a whole different direction. But I've learned that to allow that to happen and allow these happenstance things to happen, even on bigger scales than just the interview, because later when I come back to the edit room and after the interview, I'm like, man, that went a whole different direction. But I allow it to go that way now. I don't try to like direct that anymore. So when months later, I can be in the edit suite putting this together. And then when I'm putting the puzzle pieces together, I can see there's a bigger hand on my production and on the whole idea of what I'm doing. And it fits like a puzzle. I'm like, wow, that whole direction she took, even though I wasn't planning on that, I wanted this kind of story, ends up being something else because there's another piece of the puzzle that I had gotten to interview someplace else that it perfectly fits. So everything from allowing the participants to really express themselves and not try to mold that interview if it goes a way different way, I'll allow that. Or even if our schedules changed, for some reason one of the participants drops out and we get another person, or we can't get to this one location and we have to shoot in another location, I'm finding out that all these things and all these circumstances end up being for a reason. When I get back in the edit suite and I put it together, I'm like, I mean, a great example. Now, here's the example. We're in New York. It's raining cats and dogs. We finished one interview and we're out at lunch. And embarrassingly enough, the camera drops about a foot onto the ground. It damages one of the hookups to the camera. We're even in New York, we had a heck of a time trying to find the right piece for it. You know, we were down because of the rain, because of all this other stuff in the camera. We were down for like 2 days. So we end up working with Jack Delaney, who's a 9/11 first responder. And we were supposed to work with him the next day. And we were like, Jack, we can't get to you for another 2 days. Ends up through all these happenstances, you know, coincidence is God's way of remaining anonymous. We end up in this beautiful beach 2 days later with Jack Delaney that we would not have been at on Long Island. We get an amazing interview there with him. And then when the sun sets, we're there at the perfect time, the perfect 15 minutes with our drone to get this like stellar shot. And if that camera wouldn't have dropped then, these things would have been set into motion that we ended up on this beach in Long Island with Jack Delaney, the 9/11 first responder. We would not have ended up there and got this priceless footage. So the answer to your question is, at the time, I'm always shocked and I kind of push back, but quite often I got to let these things roll because they're for a bigger reason.
Mm. Wow, that's amazing. So tell me, Eric, your latest feature documentary, Unmasking Hope. Now, I've read that it's a testament to resilience in the face of adversity and it illustrates the human capacity to heal. Tell us a bit about your journey with that and why did you choose this, this aspect as your next piece of work? What makes it different from the other documentaries that you've done?
Well, what makes Unmasking Hope different, my current film, is it's a broader look at trauma. And so the question is, how did I get to the point of wanting to look at a broader look of trauma? Is when when we released my last film, Searching for Home, Coming Back from War, on public television, it ended up being enormously popular. We had over 2,300 airings in 3 years, and so uh, not only was public television interested in what's the follow up to this, but my clinical supervisors, one from Stanford University and now one from New York University, and my associate producer, we got together and we're like, okay, what can we do to capture a bigger audience? Because Search for Him Coming Back from War was a soldier a veteran, military-oriented film. Although people can connect with that subject matter, it's not a direct connection, as in, wow, that's exactly my situation. I'm a sexual trauma survivor. I'm a cancer survivor. So we're looking for something that would be a broader canvas, if you may. So that was the original idea behind Unmasking Hope, was why don't we start to look at the similarities of all these different trauma survivors. And the fact is, what's amazing, and I found this out with the veterans, is that we all heal in such a similar way. Is the Korean War veteran, Purple Heart Marine, he heals the same way as the the female Iraqi veteran that has military sexual trauma on top of her PTSD. Their healing is very similar, very different, but it's a similar kind of structure. So that's where we started folding this all into Unmasking Hope and saying, okay, well, if that's true, then why don't we take the 9/11 survivor and compare them to a sexual trauma survivor, compare them to a mass shooting survivor, and lo and behold, it's amazing that their stories have so much commonality, even though their modalities and the way they heal and their circumstances are so different. It's the same trajectory for healing. And so that's really where Unmasking Hope was born.
Now, you speak about trauma survivors. Now, I know some of the stories that you speak about are quite impactful, quite shocking. How do you manage to, to get your essence across the screen, but yet at the same time, maintain the empathy that people don't get too scared or too fearful of what they're listening to?
Wow, that's a really question. So how do we not really frighten the viewer with the subject matter? It's pretty simple for me, and I learned this a long time ago in working with my films, especially with the veterans, is we do not necessarily have to show the trauma. And I try to steer away from actually spending too much time in the actual trauma. That's very, very secondary to what we speak of in the film. So we don't, with my veteran films, while we have some mention of war and we see some footage from the wars, we don't get graphic. We don't need to tell a war story. We don't need to tell the grisly details. And it's the same with sexual trauma survivor. It's the same with the 9/11 survivor. We know what happened with 9/11. We really focus on after the trauma. And that's key to not triggering the individual. So we really want to put over, I would say over 2/3 of the film is about the healing and the hope. And a third is about what happened, or even less. I always remember, when I'm have my first cut, I look at that and I'm like, oh my gosh, we have way too much of the truth. We have way too much of the trauma, and we cut that down as small as we need to because it's very secondary to the healing and the hope. And so that's where I think the viewers are drawn in and not triggered or re-traumatized in any way, is that we don't talk about the incident. We really talk about the healing and the hope and that whole journey, which can be arduous and very trying, but we maintain a posture of hope throughout the film. So I think that's one of the key ingredients, to not really over dramatize or scare away, I guess you would say, the viewers.
Mm. Now, you yourself have been a trauma survivor and you've come out of it, you've healed from it. Tell us about your journey with that.
Well, my personal journey through trauma is, and here I am saying, you can't really quantify trauma and stuff, but in a way, looking back on it, my trauma now has turned into my biggest gift on both counts. There's two different places. I lost my home uh, almost 30 years ago now in the Painted Cave fire disaster in Santa Barbara. There's 400 other homes that were burned in this fire disaster, and they burned all in 24 hours. It was a fire storm, and that left me basically with all my worldly stuff was gone. It was all burned, and it left me just with my personal relations. It took me 7 months to kind of wander around and wallow in my second trauma, which was my alcoholism and my drug addiction. And I really traumatized myself with that. And to the extent of basically getting to a hopeless state. And, but then 7 months later, the woman that's my wife now gave me this card to this guy that had said, "Why don't you go see this gentleman, Don R? He has this outpatient group, but he's also a member of a certain group fellowship that have found a way out of drugs and alcohol and the addiction." And so basically, I went to go see this gentleman, and in a couple of days, I found myself in meetings and meeting other people like me, and that was the start of it. And that was really the key and the genesis to me starting to see things differently. And without the fire, I would never have been able to get to the point of willingness to accept that. And the fire was the motivation and the inspiration for my first film, Faces in the Fire, about recovery after a disaster that I did right after I got sober. And that was my first Emmy Award. But more importantly, it was picked up by the National Institute of Mental Health as a teaching tool. So now that trauma and that thing I went through, my recovery and the fire, I look back on that as my biggest gifts because it sent me on the course and the path that I'm on now, and it set my calling. I was a very different person before that happened, but now I can look back on it and say, that was the biggest gift. And time again, I hear that with the participants in my film. That thank God that happened to me. Thank God, etc. That this certain thing happened to me because it changed my life and opened my eyes. And I think we were talking about this a little bit with the coronavirus and what's going on now. It's changing our life and opening our eyes and giving us a certain amount of gratitude to the freedoms and things that we have. So it's a way of thinking of being able to turn some of these things that happen to us, these things seemingly that are traumatizing, but turn them into a gift by being able to use them later on. And that's my story. That's I, I'm I have a picture of that fire in my office, and I look at it every morning when I come in, and I'm like, just remember, seemingly the worst thing that can happen to you, God can turn this into the biggest gift.
Wow, that's truly inspirational. And now look at you. You're a seven-time Emmy Award recipient, and you've produced for different major networks and for Discovery, TLC, and loads more. How do you feel? I mean, you must feel successful, right? So how does that make you feel?
I'm sorry, I laugh at that. How does this make me feel? It looks great on paper,
Yeah.
my successes and everything, but I'm driven to get to the next level constantly. And we're like, and good or bad, I look at Searching for Home Coming Back from War. It did extremely well, and we got great reviews in the New York Times. But I'm like, okay, how are we going to move to the next level? How are we going to take Unmasking Hope to the next level? So I'm always a little bit unsettled in where can I take my talents? And it's a tough business. The show business is a tough business, and sometimes I get the feeling that the entertainment world is more interested in sensationalism
Mm.
and blowing things out of proportion and drama than they are in the healing and the hope. And it's kind of my crusade to constantly push, where can I get next level? How can we get the idea of healing and hope into this reality TV world? How can we kind of change this construct from sensationalism into a more connected, empathetic, tolerance producing kind of entertainment? So the answer to that question is, I guess maybe I don't take enough time to take stock of where I've been and what I've done, because I'm constantly trying to push into the next area. And in my time on this earth, try to get the next film done, try to get it to the next level, so more and more people can experience the healing and the hope. And
And do
so,
you think? Yeah, I'm
oh,
sorry.
go
And do
ahead.
you think this will change in the future? Do you think that the mindset of of the audience will change? That they would connect more with your kind of documentary films or not?
You know, I'm hopeful, and I see the boat slowly turning sometimes, especially towards mental health awareness. I mean, there's some great organizations out there that are trying to put content out and influence content into a more kind of hopeful, kind of more human uplifting kind of area. But am I? It's just very frustrating because I think the humans. I mean, even I'm drawn into it, like the kind of overblown sensationalism of certain things because everybody wants to slow down to see the car crash. And it goes back to what I was saying. My films aren't necessarily so much about the car crash, and the after and the the immediate aftermath and the drama. Mine are after and about the healing. So, it's a slow it's a slow process. And so I just constantly keep pushing and praying that it will turn that way. But overall, in general, the discourse about stigma and mental health has really come up. And that makes me really happy because compared to when I did my other veterans film, Homecoming: A Vietnam Vet's Journey, it was just at the beginning of these conflicts that we're getting into, and nobody understood the plight of the veterans. Nobody took the time to understand um, the difficulties that the veterans have when they're coming home, readjusting and assimilating back into civilian life. But now it's day and night. Everybody, it seems, to a certain extent, are aware of the challenges that veterans face coming home, and that and trauma, and the stigma is slowly wearing away. So there is hope.
Now, I know before you actually get to the part of filming and things, you have to have your storyline and you have to write about everything, right? So, tell us about your writing journey. How did how do you start writing your storyline? Where do you get your ideas from? What's your process when you write? Take us on that trip.
I don't, with my documentary work. Um, oh, I was going to say I don't really write a lot. We actually did. I mean, I got to take that back. With Searching for Home, what I do with Searching for Home in particular, as an example, I like to kind of spitball and hunker down with certain clinicians that I get along very well with. Dr. Jeremy Crosby, he wrote a book called "A Mind Frozen in Time," and he's an expert in trauma therapy. And him and I spent a long time just exchanging ideas and emails about Searching for Home, coming back from war, and we compiled like a couple hundred page, like, just of just notes. And I constantly just compile notes and ideas. I look at the overall, you know, uh, breadth of what I really want to say, what the segment of the audience is, and what the participants would look like. And then I take a step further and I reach out to some of my more artistic friends. For example, with Unmasking Hope has a big component of animation. So I was able to reach out to another California Institute of the Arts alumni, Ed Bell, and we sat down and talked conceptually for a long time. So a lot of it is a big kind of meeting and collaboration about conceptually what does this thing look like. And then I start to narrow things down. Then we start to put the feelers out there for individuals and participants. And then, as I said earlier in this interview, with my mind trying to keep my mind super open, we start to go out in the field and interview. And then sometimes the film takes on, well, sometimes it always takes on a life of its own. Then I can start to see it breathing, and I allow it to go in its own direction once we're in the field. And then once get back into the edit suite, that's really like, and the edit suite is really when I take all those notes and everything and write the symphony, I guess you would say. But I'm not writing it, I'm putting it together and editing it and juxtaposition and putting this here and putting that here in this thought and making the whole story arc in that edit suite, and that's where everything comes together. And I really love the editing process. With Searching for Home, the editing process took, man, almost 9 months because we
No,
had
that was
so many big, huge stories. And I can get into the real particulars of how we put that together, to be able to just see the stories in it because we had so many participants in that film. Um, but uh, but that's really where it all comes together. All these thoughts, all these ideas, I let it kind of flow, and then in the edit suite, it all comes together. And inevitably, if I follow my kind of soul gut in the edit suite, it really does come together. It just is, again, it's a process.
Mm. So I had read somewhere that you had written that finishing a hook, script, and story, etc., are often the most toughest part of being a writer. Could you like elaborate a bit on that?
Oh my gosh. Well, there's two different sides to that. Is in the documentary world, um, and in particular the commercial documentary world and reality TV, everybody's looking for a hook. And what's the hook to this film? And I have two great producers I'm working with, Paulette Lifton and Memi Maynard. And we took Unmasking Hope from just a 1 hour and we developed it into a series and we started shopping it around. And it's very frustrating in the LA Hollywood market because a lot of the feedback we got was, and it goes back to us talking about this, people accepting the idea of healing and hope. They would ask, where's the hook? What's the hook? And I'm like, wait, I think the hook is these people survived 9/11, and 17 years later, they're finally getting their life back together. They're putting things together. That's the hook. The hook is this hope. And it's very, very frustrating to try um, to sell these pieces and have people see the hook because most oftentimes the hook is so much more dramatic and again it's kind of an extorted reality, uh, and we're trying to sell this idea of the healing and the hope. So that's the frustration with that, and and it's interesting, and we do a considerable amount of writing and putting together the pitch deck and the treatment and everything, and it just it crosses a line to me to try to uh, go and sensationalize these stories. I want to tell the real story and the heart story and the soul story. So I have to. If they can't see the hook, then I'll just keep trying to get it to the right people that will finally see the hook.
And do you manage most often?
You know, uh, here's the interesting thing: is the public sees the hook, and the public, was Searching for Home, coming back from war. We finished it, and as a writer, I guess you say, I ended up putting this whole edit piece together, in the editing, and the symphony basically of Searching for Home, coming back from war was done, and it had so many beautiful parts and everything, and then we get it out there to the distributors, and I thank God for the people that stuck by us. KCET Los Angeles did the original premiere here, and we had a theatrical run for Searching for Home, coming back from war in New York and LA, and then we were wanting to take it into the bigger public television market, and so we got a lot of pushback, and a lot of distributors would say, "Well, there's too many individuals in the film. People like one storyline. It's too dramatic. It's too that." And when we went through three different possible distributors until we ended up with NETA, the National Education Telecommunications Association, that distributed it to public television, and it goes on to 2,300 showings in 3 years, and you can do the math on that. And so,
Oh,
yes, that was very successful, and the public loved it. They ate it up. If you looked at the other films that were released in that year that had the word veteran or were veteran associated films, we went on to clearly way more airings and way more eyes on our film than any other film at the time. And And so we were successful on a public level, but trying to get the message across and to sell it to the distributors and the people that are holding some of the gate keys, I guess you would say, is very difficult because again, they want something a little bit more larger than life. They want to see more of the auto accident. They want to see more of the car crash, and not
Mm,
so much of what happens afterwards. And that's just my personal feeling. And again, that's something I keep pushing towards. And
mm,
but once the film gets out there, I know once Unmasking Hope gets its airtime and gets out there, it's going to be enormously successful with audiences because so many people will be able to connect with it, and that's the key. And they want hope. People want to see something that portrays an aspirational story of hope, and
mm.
it's a bottom line.
And when is it going to be aired?
Unmasking Hope right now, we're in the process. We're over halfway done. We're in the process of finishing the funding right now, and any listener wants to help out with our mission, you can go to unmaskinghopethemovie.com. That's unmaskinghopethemovie.com. And we're working with the International Documentary Association, and we have a fiscal sponsorship, which puts us in a 501c3 nonprofit. And so all donations are tax deductible as allowable. But so we're about 50% through, and we're finishing our funding right now. So we're hoping it would be early next year that we would be having this on air, Unmasking
Mm.
Hope. But Searching for
Wow.
Home Coming Back from War, for your audience, particularly in Belgium and in Europe, it's available on Searching for Home Coming Back from War is available on iTunes, Google Play, Amazon Prime, all those if you want to take a look at it.
Mm. I'll surely do that. Let's go back to writing a bit. And could you
Yeah.
like tell us the difference between writing a novel and screenwriting? What is the biggest difference there?
Oh my gosh. In one way, I just finished a screenplay that's based on my film Homecoming: A Vietnam Vet's Journey, and I'm working with again my producers on the rewrites and getting this film made. But it's very similar to the structure of a novel, but it's extremely visual. And so the idea of filmmaking and the visual arts is to tell the story not necessarily through words, but visually. What is propelling me to connect with this and continue to watch this visually? And so that's the biggest challenge is setting up your characters just as you would a novel. You have the whole same structure and you know it's you have your beats, you have your act structure, but the biggest difference I see when I'm trying to write is to make sure that I'm trying to show what's going on visually, so it's going to connect with the viewers visually instead of like necessarily just saying what's going on. So it has to kind of transcend just words and descriptions into a visual language and a visual story language. So then the story is told visually rather than just through, as in a novel, just through the words. So being innovative that way and being able to set my characters in areas where they don't necessarily have to have exposition to be able to tell the story. And
Mm.
that's the biggest challenge I feel. And it's funny with my producers when we go through the script, they're like, "Oh, you don't need this. You don't need this." And Mimi always tells me, and she's a great script doctor. She's like, show it. It's like you don't have to say it, show it. And so that's the big difference, and also it's very very truncated. A good screenplay should be coming in around 120 around 120 130 pages, and so the whole story is very truncated. I don't have the time for a lot of expositions and things like that.
What about emotions then? Because if you're trying to capture, you're doing everything visually, how do you manage to capture the emotions and things like that without dialogue or?
It's funny because you can go to, some of the greatest films, some of the silent films. It goes back to this thing that we were talking about earlier, this basic human connection we all have. And it's about developing a connection with the character, about putting them in situations where we can have empathy, basically for the person on the screen. So um, it's obviously through dialogue and understanding of who the person is, but some of the greatest films are very universal because we can just watch those films and connect on a human level. And so it's trying to develop that character so his nuances, his what he does and his daily routine, his whole being on the screen that the viewer connects with. And going back to screenwriting, for me, that has to be established in the first 10 pages. And of course there's going to be some dialogue and things like that, but what does he do, what does he where is he physically located, how does he react to his surroundings? It is a kind of a universal language. So once we in that first 10 pages, once we kind of connect with that first lead character, then we're kind of in for the journey. And so it's setting him up and setting that character up in the right situations and basically canvas so that we can connect as a person somehow. It's little things. I remember in what was it in I think it was I can't remember what film, but in the very beginning, the main character is at this huge crime scene, and he's leaving, and this little kid is standing there, and the little kid is obviously doesn't have any money or anything like this, and the character hands him a 5 as he leaves this crime scene, and so we immediately connect with the character and go, oh wow, he's a charitable guy that has an eye for that particular type of that person, and he has a soft spot. He's just not that hard ass that we see portrayed, in the very beginning of the film. And it's adding nuances like that for the character
Mm.
that makes us connect with him on a human level. And so it's just it's an overall aggregate of all these little tiny parts that you put into the character.
Mm. My God, you said 10 pages. That's like nothing.
Yeah, and well, that's such a Hollywood thing too, because they talk about that first 10 pages being so key, because here in Hollywood is when people read scripts, they don't go further than the 10 pages. If they're not hooked by then, if they're not connected with it, it goes on the big heap in the back of the room.
Wow. I mean, if I'm writing a novel, the first 10 pages is not even like half the character that you introduced there.
Right? So that goes
Yeah.
back to what I was saying about it being so truncated.
Yeah.
So it just it's visual and it's truncated.
Okay. Now I know that you must do a lot of research to get your material. How do you go about that? Is that difficult? The entire process? How long does it take you to do your research for a particular character or what emotions or whatever you're trying to get through your film?
That's really interesting, because with the current script I'm writing right now is based on my documentary Homecoming: A Vietnam Vet's Journey. And this particular character that I'm basing the main character on, I've interviewed him probably way over half a dozen times. And some of those interviews were like marathon interviews. So I had an advantage with that literally I went back into all my archives and I printed out all his interviews. And I was able to then go through all the interviews, read them again, highlight some of the classic things that he said, and really get an overall view of who he is again. And I knew him I know him very well, anyways. So I had a huge advantage that way, but that was a big part of my research on this. And the other parts of the film are so intrinsic to my life because I try to write from what I already know. And with this film Angel Fire, there's a lot of components in it, and I try to uh, put in there because I already very much know that whole milieu, that whole canvas. And so I mean, there's a considerable amount of research, but it was kind of all put in my lap. Now with my next screenplay that I'm trying to do, there's some which kind of is a little bit daunting, because there's some parts of it that are so key to it that I don't understand at all. So yes, there's going to be a lot of research, a lot of biographies, a lot of actually talking to some of the people that know some of these people that were involved in this situation at the time. And, going back to my other film, it, it's a veterans oriented film, and my main audience are very hardcore veterans. And if I get anything wrong or any of the
Mm.
language wrong or anything, I get called out really quickly. So it's very important that I have everything to a T. But I've been in this niche, I guess you could say, working with the veterans now for almost 20 years. So I kind of know that. So one of my main things is I try to write from what I know. The core I really need to know about. But I kind of had this last screenplay put right in my lap, having done the film. I based it on my film.
Mm. You mentioned a while ago about editing, how you love editing and putting everything together and stuff. I know as a writer, when I finish writing my manuscript and I've got to edit it, I hate it. I find it seriously boring, to go through every detail of a comma and a full stop. And the editing, I'd just rather give it to someone else. How come that's different for filmmaking? How come their editing is so interesting? Or is it a personal preference?
Well, it's there's two different kinds of editing we're talking about. With my script that I'm working on right now, I couldn't edit myself, and I would hate the editing of a manuscript of the written word. And some stuff I fall so in love with. It's not the most fun part of things. But when I'm talking about the documentary work, I love editing because I'm actually editing together images. I'm editing together interviews and thoughts. It's not on paper anymore, and it puts me into a place where more often than not, very beautiful and miraculous mistakes, quote, happen. You know, I never know what it's going to look like or what the synergy or energy is going to be look like when I intercut. I go back to the Korean veteran, in his late 70s, with um, intercutting it with Sandra Lee, who's very young, female Iraqi veteran. I don't know what that's going to look like until I get in the edit suite. So I start, and I do pour over tons of transcripts, but I start to put those interviews together, and the magic that happens in there. It's like, oh my gosh, they like what this Korean vet said is finished by what this female Iraqi vet said, which is like then juxtaposed later by what this Korean or this Vietnam vet said. So there's all these things that start to happen in the edit suite, documentary wise, when I'm putting together interviews and I start to put the visuals over it, and it's juxtapositions, it's parallelism, it's just beautiful. Then I add the music and I start doing that. It's like creation, and this emotion that was already there, it gets heightened, it gets focused. It's amazing. So that's really fun. But when it goes back to what you're saying with the novel, with the manuscript, I'm not too excited about that. And unfortunately, I have some great partners that work with me on the real technical sides of the scripts, but that's mainly with my narrative, like storytelling work. With my documentary work, it's just me and the edit suite, and that becomes magic time.
Mm. When creativity is at its best, kind of thing.
Oh yeah, I mean it is. It's just like it's like when you go to the farmer's market and you get a beautiful piece of fish, then you go over here and you get some really fresh herbs, and then you get a great vegetable, and you have it all in your bag, and it's going to be amazing, but it's all separate. That's what it's like when
Mm-mm.
I'm out in the field. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be crazy when I start to put this together. Then you get back in the kitchen, which is the edit suite, and you start to chop things up, and you're like, oh man, I can't really wait. And then but there's a process that has to happen, just like with cooking, until you put it on the table. And it's the same with editing. When you start to do the transcripts, put all this stuff together, get the music together, get the images, but you start to put that together, and man, what an exciting, amazing process that is, because I love going in the field. I love meeting the people, but man, when I know I have the film and it's all in the bag and I'm in my edit suite, there's some huge challenges. Sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, how is this ever going to work? But man, you just keep working it until all of a sudden it pops, and then that's when the magic happens.
And have you ever been blocked or, like where you kind of can't work anymore and you're kind of stuck? How do you get out of that?
Oh my gosh, the best for when I get blocked, the best thing for me to do, really, and I don't do this enough, is get to the beach. No, seriously, I mean that's a kind of a bigger metaphor for just letting it go and getting out of there, because nothing in art ever works when it's forced,
Mm.
and I just have to walk away, and it's really tough, especially sometimes you don't get the luxury of walking away because you have some sort of deadline or this and that. But man, if you can walk away and get refreshed and come back, and one of my big things is I ask I ask my spirits to, when I'm sleeping, to rearrange and download new ideas to me, and getting out in the fresh air, getting out and getting away and getting to a place where I'm open to like looking at it a whole different way. I worked with one of my mentors was great, Robert Salicia. He always used to look at my cuts. I cut a lot of commercials with him as an editor. He'd look at the cut and he goes, now turn it on its side, turn it on its side. And that I hear that all the time. I'm like, I got to look at this and turn it on its side. This is the obvious way I'm looking at it. What if I were just to do this? Well, that sounds crazy, but I'm going to try it. But the main thing is getting out of whatever you're doing as an artist, refreshing yourself, come back in and look at it different, turn it on its side, take something out that seems like you have to have it, and then put it back together and say, oh wow, it's just being open minded.
And what's your next project then? Are you gonna step into a different genre or are you gonna stay with, trauma and healing and things like that?
Well, as far as my next documentary, I'm really not too sure what my next documentary is going to be. I want to finish Unmasking Hope. That's my main focus. But my project right now that is really me stepping out is this film, and I've actually never really said the title. It's called Angel Fire. It's about a
Mhm.
Vietnam veteran looking back on his life while he's on a motorcycle run across the United States, but it's so much more about that. It's about his guardian angel that follows him literally, and his whole life is like his former wife, his son. It has surfing, it has motorcycles, it has a very big metaphysical component to it. So, and it's a narrative feature film, and so that's where I'm going right now, and it's a big deal, and it's kind of it's very different for me. But like what I was saying, I know this canvas so well that I can tell a story that will resonate with every veteran, every person that's had a twin flame soulmate connection. It has all these components in it, and so that's my next project, and it's a big stretch. But again, my two producers that are on board already are big support, and we're moving towards getting this thing done.
Wow, it sounds interesting. And is it based on a true character then?
The basis is this one gentleman, J.R. Franklin, that was in my film Homecoming: A Vietnam Vet's Journey. It started out about being about his life, then it kind of blossomed into places that it needed to go to fill out the really fill out the whole story. And
Mm.
it's way more than a veterans film. It's way more than just a motorcycle film, or a Vietnam film. And I think it has something for everybody that can touch them on a very kind of soul level.
Mm. Well, but you just spoke about the concept of twin flame and soulmate and stuff. I didn't know that there were many people that believed in that. How come you believe in that?
From personal experience,
Oh, tell us about it.
oh my god, it's just not something I talk about. I mean,
Oh.
seriously, there's only about 3 people that really understand, and but it got to a point with me where I was in a situation where it came to me that it's, "Eric, either you believe all this stuff or it's all just fantasy, and what's your decision?" And I had to go to the point that pointed me towards, God has an infinite amount of possibilities in life, and how He's laid out this whole world and this physical world we're in. And I just said yes. I think this is really this is I believe this, and this is the way this is. And if that makes sense, my the whole twin flame journey has been a real eye opener for me, and the whole archetype has been exactly laid out as it has been that I've read, and it's been exhilarating, disturbing, heartbreaking, and eye opening, and it's been a huge catalyst for me and my work. So
Mm. Because well, this is something
yeah,
very personal, but I mean, I'm not very sure about the whole twin flame soulmate thing, but I do believe that they're two different things, right? Twin flames are different and a soulmate is different as well, isn't it? Or
yes,
are they the
yes.
same thing?
No, they're very different. I don't want people out there that are like super experts going, well, that guy's totally off. But the twin flames are very different than the soulmate. The soulmate is, one of your soul partners, one of your connections here on this earth that you do understand them, you are connected with them, but the twin flame really is your other half. And that's what the big difference is. And that's where, and you're not necessarily guaranteed in this life. I'm a, and this is when the construct of I'm a Christ believer too, and I'm a Christian, but I believe God has built this whole crazy world in such a way that these things are evident and true. But I do believe that the twin flame is your other half, and in
So
this
all
life
of us,
we're not
yeah.
necessarily destined to be with them in this life.
Mm. So we all have a twin flame. Maybe not in this life, but there is a second half to us or something like that.
And someplace in this world, possibly now, there is your twin flame. There is the other half wandering around, and it's striking when you see them.
Oh my God, that's like so scary. It's not scary, but it's so like, what do you say? I don't know, like crazy. I mean, I understand what you're talking about, but wouldn't it be amazing to actually have your twin flame right next to you and stuff?
Yeah, it would, and it is, but sometimes it's not the time or the place for that meeting, and that's what the film's kind of based on. That this veteran, he has his twin flame, but it definitely wasn't the time. But she sparked, she or he sparked this huge amount of growth in this individual, and that's kind of the way it sometimes plays out.
Amazing, interesting. Tell me something, Eric. If I mention healing through creativity, what does that tell you?
I think those are two beautiful words. What it tells me is, it, creativity. Our creator is the most creative being or entity in the world or in this universe, and he created us to be creative because it connects with our soul, and that's where I'm going with that. And I think creativity allows us a peek into that soul that we're carrying around, and it's a frustration to live so much in this world and know there's this soul inside of you, and how do you access that? And I think creativity and getting things, no matter if it's writing, it's music is one of the most beautiful displays of creativity. And the true virtuoso takes that creativity, no matter what their um, practice is, and connects with their soul. And once you connect with your soul and let something out, that's where the healing starts to happen. So I think creativity is so connected, and I love seeing people working through, like our 9/11 survivor, Becky Lassinger. She's a painter, and she hadn't painted since 9/11 for like 16 years or something, and she just started painting again when we met her. And that creativity is like this window to her soul, this connection, this little tiny sliver of the door is open to the other world of the soul there, and she's letting that out through her painting, and I can see her healing because she's doing this. And that's really what strikes me with those two words. And I'm constantly trying to be, in the process of creativity, And it's really hard sometimes because I have to make this a business, and I get so
Mm.
lost in trying just to get something done. I got to get this, Unmasking Hope made into a series, da, 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 and I forget about being in process. So I kind of let that side of me go, and it to my own detriment, that I'm not in process. I'm not actually being creative because that's part of my health. But I so believe in healing and creativity because it just connects us with our soul, and then we can let that stuff out that's like gathering in there.
Mm. Yeah, nice. Have there been any writers or books that have played a key role on your writing or filmmaking journey?
Oh man. Well, any writers? It's funny. This kind of came to me. There's this Christian writer, Max Lucado, that has written some of the most uplifting books I've ever read in my whole life. And he wrote this one book called "It's Not About You," and it reminds us that our life here is not about us. It's not. It's about others. It's about like giving to others, and through giving to others, we'll get back so much. And so Max Lucado has been a very, very big kind of impression on me. Um, any other writers in particular? Oh my gosh, The War of Art, not the art of war, but there's this
Hmm.
book. I think it's Sheffield is the guy's name, but this book that my friend Ed Bell said you have to read this, and you should read this book. It's called The War of Art, and it's about all the things that we put before, like getting to our true self, to our true work, to our art. And it talks about that, and it talks about getting rid of those and getting just to work on our art and letting our muse guide us. So the War of Art was very big on me. And then there's other filmmakers that have influenced me. But just as far as the authors and things, that those are the first couple ones that really come up.
Mm. Yeah, I'm going to read that. And do you have any advice for aspiring youngsters that want to follow in your footsteps?
Oh my gosh, my own kids, I've told them, do something else. If no,
Oh.
no, I mean, no, seriously, unless you're really called into it, unless you really feel that heavy calling on yourself to do the documentary film work, especially now it's such a crowded area. There's so many ways to change the world and change and be of service to others. But in particular, as somebody that wants to be a documentary filmmaker, you got to live that life, and you got to be not just looking for something that's dramatic and oh wow, I just want to do this film. This is just for me, from my point of view, that oh, this is such a dramatic subject. I could make this movie. You know what? The best thing to do is to get inside that subject and try to live it yourself and connect some meaningful way and then do the film. Because my connection with the veterans goes deep, and it wasn't an accident. I know I was supposed to connect with them at a certain point and continue to tell their story. And it was a trial by fire kind of process of first being allowed into what I would call the military veterans family, and now I'm expanding that. And but the other thing is doing it from where you have a connection and you understand truly what the message is that you have, and that takes a long time to develop, and it could be a lot of roads to that place. So it's following your heart and doing it from your heart instead of from your head.
Mm. And have any of your kids actually seen your documentaries, and what was their feedback?
Oh, they yeah, they've all seen all my work, and they're proud of it. And in particular, my oldest son now is working in some political campaigns, and he runs into a lot of veterans, and he understands the veterans now, and he's like, "Dad, this guy is so cool. He reminds me of this guy," and he's able to like flow now because of his understanding and connection with the veterans world. But my middle boy, it's funny because they just give me guff about my films, and in Searching for Home, coming back from war, one of the big metaphors is this horse that keeps appearing, and particularly in connection with Mike Pyre, one of the veterans. And Will would always say, "Dad, it would be a great movie if you just cut the horse out." And so then he's like, "Okay, he's like, an unmasking hope. Do you have any horses?" And it's like, "Oh, come on." So
That's cute.
yeah,
Okay. And Eric, it's been lovely talking to you. Tell me, do you have any other information you'd like to share with our listeners?
yeah, I'd love to. If you want to get a hold of me or find out more about what I'm doing, you can go to www.ecproductions.com. That kind of has everything about me, what I'm working on right now. If you want to get more involved with Unmasking Hope, you can look us up, Unmasking Hope, on Instagram, Unmasking Hope on Facebook, but also go to our website, Unmasking Hope, the movie.com. And also, there's a place to donate and find out what the status of the film is on that area right there.
Oh, amazing. So I'm going to put all that information in the description box of this episode as well so that they can, click on and find you there. And it's been lovely chatting with you, Eric. It was really amazing. I've learned a lot and I'm looking forward to Unmasking Hope, to actually see it. And I'm going to read the book that you suggested. And yeah, it's just been great. I hope you had as much fun as I did.
Oh my gosh, this is great. Thank you. And it's just so cross country and multinational.
Yeah,
No,
isn't it?
it was so much fun to share this at the beginning when we were sharing about like the commonality of everybody's response and our personal responses to the whole crisis that's going on now. My heart is different leaving this interview now, knowing that across the world the responses are totally similar to what's happening here. And to me, that's kind of comforting because it reminds me that we're all in this together. I mean, it's like it doesn't matter all the politics, it doesn't matter the color, it doesn't matter like where we are.
Mm,
It really leaves me with a powerful feeling. So I appreciate that.
yeah. And how do you see the future? It's positive, right?
You know, the future is very positive. I think every time that an individual goes through a trying time, well, let me step back. I think I hold a lot of positive feelings for the future. I think every time an individual goes through any sort of trying times, on the other side of that, you have a decision to make. Am I going to learn from this and then take what this has given me as a gift and give it on to others that might be going through this? Am I going to look back on this and see that that was a time of growth, or am I going to like hold this in me and carry it as a negative? And I have a strong feeling as a world and as a society we go through these things. I know we went through 9/11 here in the United States. We're all going through this whole virus thing. That hopefully we get to the other side and we look back on it and we go, wow, I want to learn from this. I want to apply these things that we've learned, but I also want to understand and remember that, what, we all went through this together, and it obliterated like any sort of cultural boundaries or political boundaries, because when it comes down, we're all human and we're all susceptible to certain things. So we're all kind of a family. So yes, I feel, I really, I feel positive about moving forwards, and I feel positive about my work. I have to constantly, because that's my calling.
Amazing. Yeah, that is so true. So inspirational too. Thank you so much, Eric, for sharing all your lovely thoughts with us. And let's stay in touch, okay?
Yeah, please, especially after you see my film, Searching for Home, Coming Back from War, and after you read The War of Art, feel free to. I think I have your email, or you can go through Ariel and she'll connect you directly with me, because I would really love to hear your feedback.
Okay, I'll do that.
Okay,
Definitely. We'll
great.
come back to you. Yeah. So thanks, Eric. Have a lovely day and see you sooner.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah. Bye,
Okay,
Eric.
all right, bye bye.
Thank you for joining us on The Three Pillars. See you next week and make it awesome.